Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, and welcome all you porcupines. This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the New Hampshire Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Glad to be here with you today. Last episode we did was episode 60. It was a great show with JP Cortez. If you missed it, we had a great conversation about sound money, the legacy of Ron Paul, so many things worth going back to watch that if you missed it. I could call this episode 61, but here's the God's honest truth. We are so busy preparing for the 2025 New Hampshire Liberty Forum, which begins tomorrow, Thursday, April 24th. It runs through the 27th. I'll tell you what, tickets are pretty much sold out. In fact, we've gone now 2 times past what we had declared previously was going to be our sellout point. But what can I say? There's so much demand for people wanting to come and join us at Liberty Forum. We've got so many great speakers coming in from across New Hampshire and also around the country for our wonderful main stage talks and our deep dive Liberty for Real dialogue series. And so many events taking place at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. So we are doing everything we can to squeeze in every single possible person who would like to get a ticket. If you haven't gotten a ticket yet and you still would like to join us at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, it's almost too late, but it's not yet too late. Go to nhlibertyforum.com, grab your ticket, use the discount code Granite Gulch, and you can join us for the next couple of days. It's going to be excellent. nhlibertyforum.com. You can see all the great speakers, the schedule. This was one they're going to be talking about for a long time. And if you miss out, you'll be the one who missed out, and you'll have to live with that on your soul for all of eternity. I would hate to be in your position if that were the case. No, seriously, would love to welcome you. And thank you to all who are coming out. To those who are patrons for the Free State Project, please remember to come and wear your Porcupine Patron lapel pin. That will get you access to our VIP lounge at Liberty Forum, which is only open to people with VIP tickets, to speakers, and to anyone with a Porcupine Patron lapel pin. So bring yours and get some nice perks at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. Okay, but of course, that's not all I'm leaving you with. Yes, we're very busy preparing. This week, I figured it was going to be too much with all the logistics going on to also wrangle someone to interview for this week. But this past Saturday, I was invited to speak at a conference hosted by some young Americans for Liberty activists at Westfield University in Massachusetts. It was on the anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And the name of the conference, they called it the Keepers of the Revolution. The focus was, how do we keep that revolutionary spirit of 1776? How do we keep it alive? In particular, how do we keep it alive in the Northeast, in this region of the country, which has, with the exception of New Hampshire, been almost totally captured by this big government progressive totalitarian ideology that is destroying the lives of so many people in Maine and Massachusetts and Vermont and New York and Connecticut. I mean, I could keep naming them. There's not a single state you'll find in the Northeast that has protected and expanded freedom to the degree that we have in New Hampshire. So I was invited to come down and speak with them, and we thought, what a great opportunity. Let's also we brought down some of our Free State ambassadors, volunteers, participants in the Free State Project, who help us do outreach to folks out there in the Liberty diaspora, to let them know what we're building here in New Hampshire and invite them to come out to visit us for events like the New Hampshire Liberty Forum or like PorcFest coming up this June. By the way, you can still get your tickets for PorcFest June 16th through the 22nd at porcfest.com. Discount code Granite Gulch for 10% off, just like Liberty Forum. So it was a great opportunity for us to connect with a lot of young liberty activists, folks who are eventually going to be looking to plant their flag somewhere. And I'd love for them to recognize, like I have recognized, that New Hampshire is the place to plant that flag. And I spoke with them at length. Actually, I was only supposed to speak for like 40 minutes, and I ended up going on for 70 minutes. I had no sense of time, and I guess they thought they were really enjoying the remarks, so they just let me keep going, and we did a lot of questions. So anyway, because I don't have a conversation lined up for this week, I thought that we would play the video of my remarks from this past weekend on the Battle of the anniversary of Lexington and Concord. I will note that the video quality and the audio quality are not going to be quite what you're used to. You can still hear things very well, but the camera's at a bit of a distance, and it was just done on my iPhone. Thank you to Scott Scheller, who at the last minute, he's been a guest on this program, and he'll be a speaker at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. Scott Scheller acted at the last minute to be the cameraman to capture this content. And now we're happy to share it with you. So I hope you're coming to join us at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. And even if you aren't, I hope you enjoy this episode today.
I have a question for you. Why are you here? It's a beautiful day outside. We haven't had too many of those yet this year. It's a beautiful spring day. And you're inside here at this conference to talk about liberty. Why are you here?
Because we are how the revolution continues.
USA!
USA! USA! USA! USA!
It's important to know why. Because there will be bumps along the road. There will be moments of discouragement. There will be moments where you just decide that maybe this is someone else's fight to fight. Maybe this isn't. I could be doing something else right now. We could be all outside doing frisbee golf or something on this beautiful day. But I think that you're here because you understand why that you're here. You understand that you're connected to something bigger than all of us. It's for an idea that has spanned many generations. It's a simple idea, but a very complicated one as well. And that idea is liberty. The idea that we have the right to live our lives how we choose, provided we take responsibility for ourselves and for the consequences of our own decisions. That's what liberty is. And there are many, many people in this country that was founded on the idea of liberty, who have lost sight of that, and who elect cycle after cycle tyrants to impose their will with violence against peaceful people who otherwise aren't doing anything to bother anyone. And so the fact that we're here today is a stand against that, especially in the heart of New England, where in this moment in time, with the notable exception of one state of New Hampshire, freedom seems to be a very rare and precious thing to find these days. So I appreciate the introduction. I'll give you a little bit of background, and as we go on, by the way, I'm going to have no sense of time whatsoever, so someone's just going to have to tell me when we're getting there.
We're behind schedule, so
all right, I will talk, and until you get what's the cane, you'll yank me off stage, or tell me what we need to do some questions. So my name is Eric Brakey. I've been in the Ron Paul Liberty Movement for, what year is it, 2025? 15 years now, 15 years. I began when I was a senior in college. I was at Ohio University. I graduated in 2010. This was the height of the Tea Party moment, which I was a little shocked the other day. I was talking to a young libertarian who I work with in the Free State movement in New Hampshire, and she's younger, in her early 20s. And I mentioned the Tea Party movement, and she said, "What's that?" So I don't know. I don't want to take for granted that some of you younger folks know that. It's hard to believe it has been 15 years, but this was a moment that was sparked during the immediate aftermath of the 2008 Ron Paul campaign, when there was this start of this conversation in the conservative movement and in the Republican Party about the Constitution and the principles of our republic. Believe it or not, that wasn't really a part of the conversation when I was growing up in the Republican Party. When I was getting very politically interested in high school under the presidency of George W. Bush. Liberty? Freedom? I mean, you did hear that word freedom thrown around a lot in those days, but it tended to be thrown around in a propagandistic way to get us to support the exact opposite of freedom. Why do we need the Patriot Act? Why do we need to surveil and spy on every single American citizen? Because freedom, that's why. Looking back on it, it's kind of amazing to think they pulled the rug over our eyes so much back then. But that's why we need to be disciplined in terms of how we understand liberty and how we think clearly about what we're pursuing. Ronald Reagan, who is someone who has a very, you look at his record, certainly he has a mixed bag when it comes to matters of freedom and liberty, but he said some pretty profound things, and I think that some of the quotes that he left us are worth reflecting on. He said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not passed on through the bloodstream. It is something that must be fought for, protected, defended, and passed on. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children about that time in America when men and women were free. It's never more than one generation away from extinction. And so that means that torch of liberty, let's dissect that. This is not it's both a new idea in a sense, in the grand context of human civilization, but it's also an idea that has been passed on from past generations. It's a responsibility that falls to you and to me. Because once that torch of liberty goes extinguished, it's very hard to light it aflame again. And here we are, we're on the anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, and I think that we think back very much to our own founding generation and the shoulders of giants that we are standing on. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, so many of that generation who were some of the wisest individuals in human history. But they themselves were standing on the shoulders of giants as well. It's hard to imagine putting ourselves in their shoes in that moment in time, the courage and the vision that it took to defy the greatest empire in the history of the world to date for an idea, for liberty, for individual liberty, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They didn't know what the outcome was going to be. Frankly, most likely they were all going to be hanged and killed. And boy, I tell you, the British Empire in those days, they had very gruesome methods for executing people. It wasn't like, you get a lethal injection and you go to sleep. They risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. But they themselves were standing on the shoulders of giants who had come before them. And I think a lot about that torch of liberty being passed from generation to generation, from Thomas Jefferson through the 10 generations to us, but I think about it going back even further than that. Our founders built this country and the framework of our republic on lessons learned from past models in history, and the greatest model they looked at was the model of Rome and the Roman Republic. Now, there have been some lessons learned over the generations since when they were framing the Constitution. But when I look, I served 3 terms in the Maine State Senate as a liberty legislator. And when you are in this role, when you have a little piece of the political power, the lawmaking power, you got to look for role models. You got to look for people who've done it before, done it effectively. The most obvious, of course, is Congressman Ron Paul, who should be the North Star for any liberty legislator who has the privilege to serve. But I think going back even further, there's a man who I consider to be the very first liberty legislator. And he's a man remembered in history as Cato. Does anyone know, I'm sure many folks have heard of the Cato Institute, right? The Cato Institute, which is named after Cato's letters that many of the founding generation wrote back and forth as they were planning the American Revolution. But those letters were named after this man, Cato. Cato was the last defender of the Roman Republic. This institution that had stood for centuries had become corrupt. Special interests were feeding at the taxpayer trough, and tyrants were rising to power. He was the last man standing against Julius Caesar as he transformed their republic into an empire. Cato. He invented the filibuster in the Roman Senate. He would stand for hours and hours filibustering Caesar's proposals as he sought to consolidate more power around himself. He was kind of the Ron Paul of his day. If you're familiar with this philosophy that some people talk about, Stoicism, he's the man who really popularized this in the Western canon, this idea that we need to be clear-eyed. We need to see reality for what it is. We need to understand what we can control, what we can affect, and we need to relentlessly pursue that. And the things that we can't control, we need to accept that too. And accept that hopefully there's a grand design and we're a part of it. Some things we leave to God, some things we take the bull by the horns and we do the best with what we can control. Now, Cato, some historians say one of his great mistakes was there were a few key figures at the end of the Roman Republic. Cato being one, Julius Caesar being the other, but there was another figure named Pompey the Great. He was a military general. He was very, with a name like Pompey the Great, you can imagine, he was very obsessed with his own greatness and wanting his country to be great, whatever that meant. Sometimes with populism, it's hard to tell. These can be amorphous things. But Pompey came to Cato at one point and proposed an alliance between their houses. And Cato was very wary of these populist figures, whether it be Julius Caesar, whether it be Pompey the Great. And he said, no, absolutely not. I will never form an alliance with you. I will never form a coalition with you. You're everything I'm terrified of. And so what happened is, instead of forming that coalition with Pompey the Great, Pompey turned around and formed a coalition with Julius Caesar. And that spelled the end of the Roman Republic. And as Caesar rose to power, Cato eventually had to form that alliance with Pompey. They formed the army of the Republic, and but it was too late. I think in the liberty movement, we've done something, we've learned that lesson a little bit, we did something similar. I think a lot of libertarians formed a coalition this year in this election cycle with Donald Trump, with the MAGA movement. And I think that was a necessary thing. But I think that we should also remember that we elected Pompey the Great, not Cato the Younger. And with Donald Trump there's a lot of good that can happen, but he's also someone that we have to watch and hold accountable. Because he's not a principled libertarian. He's not someone who principally loves the principles of the Constitution and is going to defend it. We have to continue to be that voice and holding all figures accountable. Because that torch of liberty has been passed to us. It's been passed down generation to generation, and it's in our hands, and it's our responsibility to not see it go dark, whether it's from whomever becomes a threat to that. So a little bit about me. So I got started in the Tea Party wave. I became an activist for Congressman Ron Paul. I'm sure folks know Congressman Ron Paul. He started, Young Americans for Liberty began as students for Ron Paul. He was talking about the national debt. He was talking about the destruction of our civil liberties. He was talking about the forever wars that were taking young people and sending them off to fight and die in countries where Congress didn't even care to declare war against the principles of our Constitution. He was the only one talking about it. And I said, all right, I want to jump in. I want to make a difference. I want to do what I can. So I started as an activist. I became the state director for the Ron Paul campaign in the state of Maine in 2012. We won the state of Maine We won all the delegates to the National Convention until your former governor here in Massachusetts, Mitt Romney, thought it wasn't fair, and that we won the neighboring state. He worked with the RNC to have us kicked out of our delegate slots and have us replaced by hand-picked Mitt Romney supporters that people didn't elect. And interesting fact of history here is when they did that, they changed the rules of the Republican National Committee, because Maine had done something. We elected unbound delegates to the National Convention, which means that Mitt Romney had won by like 100 votes this preference poll beauty contest in the caucuses, but he lost the delegates. And Maine got to send unbound delegates, people who got to vote their conscience and their principle for who they thought the best candidate for president was. And Ron Paul had enough states, the majority enough states, to have his name entered into nomination and to be able to give an uncensored speech on the floor of the National Convention. We can only imagine. Well, I don't know that we have to imagine too hard the kind of things that he would have said. That was the last thing they wanted. So they kicked out the Maine delegates, and they ran through these rule changes to require that all delegates must be bound in perpetuity going forward forever. Never again would Maine be allowed to send unbound delegates, or anyone else for that matter. But here's a fun part of history. 4 years later, Donald Trump won all those bound delegates. And who were a lot of the people in those delegate slots who were going to be voting for who the nominee was? They were establishment RNC hacks. They didn't want to vote for Donald Trump, but they were bound by their own rules that they had pushed through 4 years later because they thought it was going to consolidate their own power. And they ended up caught in their own trap. They could do nothing but be bound and vote for Donald Trump and make him the nominee. And I personally enjoyed watching the neoconservatives lose their own game and lose control of their party. And so after that, learning how the sausage is made and seeing how corrupt the Republican establishment is, how I had heard, I knew that what we are involved in is not a battle for one election cycle after another. It's not a battle of, oh, we've got to win this single election cycle, or it's all over and we should pack up and go home. I knew that what we are engaged in is an intergenerational fight for liberty, and we have to be clear-eyed and have our eyes on the long game. That this is not a fight that's just going to be won or lost in a single election cycle. We have to prepare for a long view of how to make liberty win. And so I ran for the state senate 2 years later. I was a young person. I was 26 years old. I ran against a guy who'd been in elected office for 40 years. So, he'd almost been in office twice as long as I'd been alive. And I was a young person. Nobody really with any political credentials thought I had any chance. It was a big swing district, but they're like, okay, here's the guy who's been the mayor of the biggest city. He's been the state senator there for 10 years. He's been the register of probate. He's done everything except for dog catcher for 40 years. He's been on the ballot for 40 years, and he's never lost a race. And here's this 26-year-old kid nobody's ever heard of, doesn't have a chance. Well, what I did was I went out and I knocked on doors. I knocked on about 8,000 doors in my district that year. I talked to people about the challenges we were facing. And I listened to the challenges they were facing, that they were concerned about. And hearing from them what they were concerned about, we had conversations about how do we fix this problem with liberty rather than with big government, right? And it was a big surprise upset. We defeated that incumbent Democrat by almost 20 points. It was an 18-point landslide. It was the biggest surprise of that cycle. And I went into the state senate. This was at a time when, believe it or not, Maine had a Republican governor, Paul LePage. In that year, partly with me winning that seat, we won control of the state senate. We still had a Democrat-controlled House. But I went in very aggressively, and one of the very first things that I sponsored and we passed was a law called constitutional carry, which we still have in the state of Maine today. And New Hampshire followed suit a few years later. So.
Yeah.
But to my New Hampshire friends, we did get it first in Maine. So, there's that. But New Hampshire did get a cleaner version passed. But the reason I bring it up is not to like pat myself on the back of like, okay, here's this great thing I did, right? I want to tell you how we did it. In fact, Maine remains to this very day the only state that has ever passed constitutional carry through a Democrat-controlled legislative body. We passed it through the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives. How do we do that? I'll tell you, it wasn't by going around and asking the politicians nicely to vote to give us our freedoms back. If you ask someone in the political class, they'll tell you that's how it's done. You want to send a nicely worded, well-drafted letter. You want to show up and testify and be really nice to the politicians and persuade them with your arguments about why they should support liberty. And you should do all those things. But if that's all you do, I'm telling you, it's not going to be enough. Not when liberty's at stake and not when there are huge opposition groups who want to take your freedoms away on the other side. The way that we get the politicians to do what we want is by understanding that, I guess there's two ideas, right? We elect all of the right people who believe all of the right things and are going to do the right thing because that's what's in their heart. Who thinks that that's how we're going to make liberty win? Maybe in New Hampshire, because we've got the numbers that we actually have like a quarter of the state legislature actual, like true in their heart libertarians right now. But even there, it's only a quarter. No. The way you get the politicians to do what you want is by making it politically expedient for the wrong people to do the right thing. Because politicians, at the end of the day, every single one of them has one thing in the back of their mind, and that is their re-elections. If I vote this way, is it going to jeopardize my ability to get re-elected? And if you convince them that it will have an impact, they are self-interested individuals. And they vote for their own self-preservation. So I remember even Republican legislators voting for constitutional carry who would say privately in our caucuses, I don't like this idea. People are going to be able to carry guns without a permission slip from the government? What's going to happen? We could become the wild, wild west. And I would point out to them, Vermont's had this law for forever. I guess they're west of us, Not that wild. I mean, the socialism is pretty wild. But even with their lack of love for freedom, they voted for it because they got thousands of phone calls and emails and postcards from their constituents. Everyone with the implicit threat, we're not, peaceful threat. Vote for constitutional carry, or there's going to be a lot of angry voters who remember this when you're up for re-election. And that moved Republicans who were on the fence, and it even moved Democrats in rural areas who knew that they had a rural constituency that liked their Second Amendment rights. And Maine became the 6th constitutional carry state in the country. And I still have the pen that signed it into law. Now, since those days, that was 2015, so we're talking about a decade ago. So a full decade. You go from, in the Bush administration era, you had like 2 constitutional carry states, Alaska and Vermont. Vermont had always had it. Like 2004, Alaska just like randomly adopted it. But it was still considered very much a fringe idea. This was the most extremist of the most extreme. Even the NRA was like, oh, constitutional carry, the only real Second Amendment extremists are supporting that, right? Even the NRA was wary on getting on board. It was considered so extreme. So 2 states in 2004. During the first term of Barack Obama, we doubled that. Arizona came on board, Wyoming came on board, maybe someone else I'm missing. Maine became the 5th or the 6th state. Actually, I think Kansas came on board, maybe they were the 5th. So we doubled it in the first term. Part of that was a backlash against Barack Obama and the energy of the Tea Party, and Barack Obama ended up being one of the best gun salesmen we've ever had in America. Every time he talked about gun control that he couldn't get passed on the federal level, people went out and they bought a whole bunch of guns. So, you know, he was very good for the firearms industry. I'm sure that wasn't his intention. But it was also very good for people looking for ways to fight back on the state level. And so we got the 6 constitutional carry states. And every 4 years since, it has pretty much doubled. Today, I think we're at something like 26, 27, 28. A majority of Americans in a majority of states don't need a permission slip from their government anymore to carry a firearm, open or concealed, as the Constitution pretty explicitly guarantees. Sorry, in Massachusetts, that's not the case, in fact. We get very scared in New Hampshire about crossing the border into Massachusetts. I'll tell you, there are so many stories of someone who accidentally crosses the imaginary line, gets pulled over, they have a firearm on them that they can totally legally carry in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and they are charged with a felony in which they lose their gun rights, they lose their right to vote in certain states, and they go to jail for a long time. I mean, that's how bad it is in Massachusetts. I don't have to tell you guys many of you guys are living with it. But the moral of the story is, with constitutional carry, we mobilized the grassroots, we put pressure on the politicians, and we won back a real piece of freedom. And the early states, like Maine and New Hampshire, and I'll even give credit to Vermont. I mean, they were really good. And, 2 centuries early, right? They just didn't screw it up. Actually, later, a Republican governor came in and signed into law gun control, which is crazy. Anyway, Vermont's got its own problems. But we won back a real piece of freedom. And people didn't think it was possible. That's the power of mobilizing the grassroots. That's the power of understanding how the mechanisms of our political system actually function. Not the way the political class tells you that they function. Whenever some member of the political class tells you, this is the way we do things here, you need to ask yourself, how do they benefit if I believe them? Because they'll tell you, I've gotten 1,000 angry postcards, and you know what? That just doesn't work on me. I'm going to vote against your bill now because I've been pestered so much by so many people. It's like, okay, well, you're really going to vote against 1,000 of your constituents who are going to be mobilized against you come election season? Y'all believe when I see it. And if they do, then you take out a few politicians and make an example out of them. Young Americans for Liberty is very good at following through on threats against politicians who vote against our freedoms, taking them out in primaries when they're Republicans, taking them out in general elections when otherwise. And that's exactly what needs to be done. In politics, you have to make a choice. You can be loved and manipulated. And it's so nice to be loved. I'm a nice guy at my core, and I love it when I get to go into the State House and all the politicians are like, oh, it's so good to see you, and oh, it's so nice to be loved. But the political class loves you if they can manipulate you. They can manipulate you to do what they want. This just isn't the year for constitutional carry. We can't go that far this year. It's just not the right time. But you know what? I know that you're going to get back on the back of the bus and you're going to vote for us anyway. So do what you're told. And we'll love you. That's being loved and manipulated. Or you could be feared and respected. And the way to be feared and respected by the political class is to be in touch, not with the politicians directly, but with their voters, and sometimes with their donors, and use the stick against them to get them to vote for liberty if it's not something they're naturally inclined to do. We need those principles and those lessons very much in our republic, because even with Donald Trump in the White House, even with Republicans in control of the House and Senate in Washington, D.C., there are going to be things that they do that deeply disappoint us from the perspective of liberty. The fact of the matter is that even with a unique figure like Donald Trump, who is a great boy, Washington, D.C. really needs a disruptive agent in there right now, and I'm glad to have that, even if he doesn't always charge in the direction I would like to see on certain things. But even still, freedom is never going to come from Washington, D.C. Cato watched his republic fall. But we have an advantage here in the United States that the Roman Republic did not have. The Roman Republic was a centralized system. It was all from the top down, from the Senate down to every governing structure underneath it. But our founders were very wise, and they did not build a centralized system. They built a federal system, a decentralized system, where the sovereignty and the power is supposed to rest with the states, not in Washington, D.C. Now, I think that over the course of our republic, many have lost sight of this. Certainly, Washington, D.C. does not want us to think about this idea that power rests in the states. We're supposed to just be, lapdogs for the federal government, begging for federal funds, doing whatever they tell us, no matter how unconstitutional it is. Oh, you want federal funding? Well, you better pass the red flag law. Oh, you want federal funding for your highways? Well, mandatory seatbelts for everyone, including adults, right? And that's a little pet peeve of mine. I'm grateful that in New Hampshire, we're the only state that says, adults can make their own choices. You can make your own choices on that. We didn't give in the siren song of federal funding. But this idea that the power and the sovereignty of this republic rests in the states is a very important one, because it means that we don't have to charge into Washington, D.C. to save our republic. Because it's not going to happen. And we can get a few good people there. I love Rand Paul. I love Thomas Massey. There are a few other folks I love to lesser degrees. But we're just not going to get a critical mass in Washington, D.C. to save the republic. It's just not going to happen. I've run for federal office twice. I was the Republican nominee in Maine in 2018 for the U.S. Senate against Senator Angus King. And I also ran for Congress 2 years later. And the Republican establishment spent a lot of money against me. Our adversaries, those who would see our republic transform into an empire, those who would see our republic become something our founders never recognized, they literally have access to a money printing machine called the Federal Reserve. And in these federal...
And the Fed.
Yeah.
And the Fed.
And in these federal races, the fact of the matter is, nothing counts as much as the amount of money that you have. I ran twice. When I ran for the state senate, I could knock on every single door in my district. When I ran statewide, when I ran for Congress, I had to hire other people to go knock doors. And so I had to sit in a room and dial for dollars and call grassroots activists and call people and try to raise the funds to compete with the folks with a money printing machine. A very few people will break through that stranglehold in that city of lies. Rand, Massey, great examples. But our competitive advantage as a grassroots liberty movement is in the state legislatures, because this is the place where shoe leather still counts more than just the sheer amount of bucks you can bring in. Because you can go door to door, talk to people face to face, and we can concentrate our efforts in these small seats that make a big difference, and we can win. Now, here in New England, and I saw the sign, so I'll get to a place where we can do some Q&A in a moment.
I said 25 minutes, so you can keep yapping.
Oh, all right. Well, you want to make sure there's some time for questions. Here in New England, I think we all kind of know it, that with the exception of one state, the prospects for liberty are pretty dim. I think that Maine is a state that's kind of on the cusp. It's gone back and forth. I personally think the best path for Maine is for the 2nd District to just break away and join New Hampshire. We'd love to have maybe. And that offer is open to the folks in Western Massachusetts as well, who might like to get away from your petty tyrants in Boston and the progressive cabal that runs your state. I know Killington, Vermont voted 20 years ago to try to break away and join New Hampshire, and Vermont won't release their hostages. But these kind of movements are happening around the country now. You have Eastern Oregon that is trying to break away and join Idaho. In fact, multiple counties have voted that that's exactly what they want to do. Southern Illinois is trying to break away and join Indiana. In fact, I think the Indiana legislature just voted to say, you're welcome, we'd love to have you. Of course, the problem always is the people in power won't give up their hostages. They like being able to use you as tax cattle. And that's how they see you. You are tax cattle to them. You go, you work your job, and you pay a chunk to them for them to appropriate for whatever purposes they design, even if those purposes are totally against your interest. If you live in a progressive state with an income tax, which, let's be honest, every progressive state has an income tax, you are literally working to fund the people who are trying to destroy you. I know, and I'm talking with some of the folks, and I would say I am inspired by the activists who are here, who are trying to make a difference in their states, in Massachusetts, in Maine, or maybe some people from Connecticut or Rhode Island. I'm inspired that you have that fight in you. I fought in Maine for 10 years to try to turn things around, and I passed the torch to some very good people who are continuing to do that work. Ultimately, though, I also want to invite you to come and check out what is being built in New Hampshire. Because we need a libertarian state. We need a state with principled, liberty-loving, and by libertarian I mean in the broad sense, constitutional conservatives, Ron Paul Republicans, Tea Party conservatives, classical liberals, whatever label you ascribe to yourself. We need a state where we control the legislature and we can both pass the liberty policies that have only been dreamed of for decades, like the school choice revolution that is taking place in this country, like constitutional carry, which was just a pipe dream, like new efforts that are going on right now to actively nullify unconstitutional federal laws. My personal favorite is a bill called Defend the Guard. Are folks familiar with this idea of Defend the Guard? Defend the Guard is the idea that we use the Constitution, we use the power inherent in the states over their own state militias, which we now call the National Guard. We call them home from wars that haven't been declared by Congress. It's absolutely our right to do it. In fact, many in past generations said the day would come that we had to. Daniel Webster, who is the great Secretary of State for this country, who was a New Hampshire man, said the day will come when the states must interpose between their militias and the arbitrary use of them by the federal government. The Constitution just requires that Congress vote on it in the first place, but they don't want to vote on it because they know if they vote for wars that are unpopular, they can be held accountable at the ballot box. And they want to keep collecting checks from the military-industrial complex to fund their campaigns. So the best thing to do is just never vote on it, let the wars go on autopilot, even if no mission can be articulated. And how many Americans have come back in caskets over the last 20 years?
Too many.
Too many. And about 50% of the troops on the ground in the wars in the Middle East the last 20 years have been from the state National Guards. If we have a state or a few handful of states who stand up, who push back, who fight for our Constitution, who utilize the 10th Amendment, we will empower so many others to follow our lead, just like we did with constitutional carry. That is the prospect in New Hampshire, where a quarter of the state legislature is now libertarian, where we have thousands and thousands who have made the move from around the country to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project to build a unique libertarian state, a land of liberty. And we chose New Hampshire for very good reasons. It's a small state where people, 20,000 people move in there makes a big difference, and it's a naturally libertarian state. This is the live free or die state. This is the state, as we all talk about the Boston Tea Party, and we talk about the Lexington and Concord, great things that happened in Massachusetts in the fight for liberty in the breakout of the American Revolution. But I will say, sometimes I think there are other events that get forgotten, and sometimes I wonder if the history books were written by Massachusetts, because I think about also in the state of Maine, I think about the Battle of Machias, the first naval battle of the American Revolution, when the people of Machias told the British that they would no longer sell them their pine trees for their ships. And they fought back, they pushed out the British, they seized their ships, they formed their own Maine Navy, they attacked British supply lines, and they pissed the British off so much that after trying to return to Machias up in Washington County, Maine, to teach the people a thing or two, and failing, they just gave up, went to Portland, Maine, and burned it to the ground. That was one of the very few good things the British did. I'm joking. But in New Hampshire, we had something called the Pine Tree Riot. I had never heard about the Pine Tree Riot in school. Have you guys heard about the Pine Tree Riot? No. In Ware, New Hampshire, 17 months before the Boston Tea Party. This was a big thing back then. We all know that flag, right? The Appeal to Heaven flag with the pine tree on it. We have all seen that. Apparently left got enraged that one of the Supreme Court justices had this flying outside of his house, the Appeal to Heaven flag. This was the symbol of liberty in New England during the American Revolution. And this has been forgotten. Why was the pine tree the symbol of liberty in New England? Because the king had declared that he owned all the pine trees. He needed them for the mast for the British Navy. And that any person in Massachusetts or Maine or New Hampshire who was caught having cut down one of the king's pine trees was severely punished. Well, in Ware, New Hampshire, they said, no, we're not doing that anymore. They organized, they fought back, they attacked the British officials who were enforcing it. And it was called the Pine Tree Riot. It was one of the first brush fires of the American Revolution, which has been largely forgotten outside New Hampshire. But in New Hampshire, we remember. It's why New Hampshire is the state that was the first state to establish its own independent government. And it's also the only state that has the right to revolution in its constitution. New Hampshire helped lead the way. So there's a long history of liberty in New Hampshire. And it is the only state in New England so far where we've managed to keep that torch of liberty burning, in the sense that we're leading the way. We're ranked the #1 state for freedom in America today, when sadly so much of New England has been captured by this radical progressive ideology. So I want to leave time for questions. I will just say, to sum it all up, this fight for liberty, I'm so impressed with you all, particularly the young people who are here with us today when you could be out doing frisbee golf or what have you on this beautiful spring day. You are a part of something that is bigger than you, something that is bigger than this whole generation that we're in. This is a responsibility that's been passed down to us from Cato the Younger to our founding generation, from Thomas Jefferson to Ron Paul to you and to me. And the question for all of us is, are we going to be the ones who let this flame of liberty go extinguished? Because that's an open question for every generation. And every generation we seem to drift further and further away from the constitutional principles that this country was built on than the one before it. You are the torchbearer. That's been passed on to you. So I invite you to do everything you can to hold the politicians accountable in your own state. And if you are so inclined to come visit us in New Hampshire, see what we're building there. Next weekend, we have the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. We heard earlier about Representative Laurel Libby in Maine and the fight that's going on there. She's going to be speaking at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, as well as many others. That's going to be up in Concord, New Hampshire. Let me know if you're interested. I'll give you a discount code. You can get a nice 10% off a student rate ticket. And then in June, we have the Porcupine Freedom Festival, where thousands of liberty lovers gather every year to build a pop-up free society and to converse about the ways we're going to advance liberty in the generation ahead. Thank you for being a part of this. The revolution is ours now. It's our responsibility to keep fighting. So I'll open it up. I'm happy to take some questions.
Yeah.
So, if you think it's our turn, do you think we should get rid of all the older generation that overstay their welcome?
So I don't know what that means exactly. The old, get rid of them? Like, no, I
No, I mean like get them out of office. Because, like, for example, Susan Collins, she's been there for 6 terms now.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of goes back to stoicism a little bit. Like, understand reality as it is, understand the change that you can affect, and understand the things that are outside your control. And I also think it goes back to a lesson from Jordan Peterson, which is start by making your own bed, right? I'm not a particularly big fan of Susan Collins. I will say I did appreciate when I ran against Angus King. I had a few phone calls with her, and she gave me, fairly good advice on certain things. In Maine, if you haven't fixed things on the state level first, aiming at changing Washington, D.C. should be a secondary priority. You got to save your state first before you try to save the country. And you can run someone and challenge Susan Collins, and maybe you take her out in a primary. I certainly think she's vulnerable in a primary. I don't know that someone who beats Susan Collins up in a primary and wins that would have a decent shot in the general. Maine's kind of gone so lopsided in terms of some of these things. But I would say the first thing to do, I think we get distracted so much by Washington, D.C. I mean, frankly, I think the value of these seats in Congress is mostly the bully pulpit, because members of Congress don't actually do much anything other than talk. I mean, if you watched, who is it from New Jersey, Cory Booker, I will say there's a master politician. He can talk for 25 hours without saying anything. If we all watched his supposed filibuster, right? If you're someone like Ron Paul or Rand Paul or Thomas Massey who can use the bully pulpit to awaken people to these ideas of liberty, then that's a valuable thing to do. But if you actually want to affect liberty in a real sense and change policies to actually, move the needle, then I'd say focus on your state legislature. I don't know, I think it's hard either way in Massachusetts, but focus on your state legislature first, focus on your local government, focus on your state government, and once you have captured those institutions, then you will have a great, ready bench of proven people to send to Congress. But make your own bed first. And as far as kind of the older generations, like clearing older generations out, I don't know, it depends if they're people who stand for liberty or not. I mean, one of my great heroes is a pretty old guy. He's turning 90 years old this year, Ron Paul. I would still vote for him if he was in Congress, right? So it's not to say that the one generation is better than the other, though our generation, well, I guess your generation, I'm a millennial, I guess a lot of you guys are Zoomers. We all have our own challenges and insights from the eras that we've grown up in. But there are things to learn from those who've come before us. I think that we need to look back at the wisdom that some in older generations, at least those who understand liberty, can pass down to us. And but if someone is a tyrant, I don't care what age they are, you should get rid of them if you have the opportunity. Long answer to a short question. Thank you. Yeah, in the back.
It's always me with the questions. Talking about making your own bed is a good transition. You spoke in passing, you just kind of threw it out, oh yeah, we got to be thinking of the long game. I'd like you to build that out a little bit into some concrete steps. And how do we adjust our own thinking and the things, I mean, apart from what you've touched upon about DC, to secure the blessings of liberty for the future generations?
Yeah, I don't know that you're going to like my answer, because for the long game in a state like Massachusetts, I can't give you a strategy. I don't see a path. I mean, what is Massachusetts ranked on, like, the Freedom Index? You guys have been very, very captured by a political ideology and a political machine that is very entrenched. I don't know how you overturn that. And that's not unique to Massachusetts. That's the same for many states around this country. You know, how are they going to turn things around in California? How are they going to turn things around in New York? The Empire State, frankly, I think that they don't deserve to have the Statue of Liberty anymore. They should send it up to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She'd be much more at home there. So my practical advice is that, you know, if you are looking at the long term of liberty, then you need to look, where do you plant yourself and where do you set yourself up for long-term success with what's available to you. One path is move to New Hampshire. Join us there and help us build the libertarian homeland. Other advice that I often give, I have often been in debates with folks in the liberty movement who are very committed to the Libertarian Party, as if like this is the vehicle that we need to use to advance liberty because, you know, some people in the Republican Party are really bad. It's true that some people in the Republican Party are really bad. But the fact of the matter is that I think we should take a sober look at political parties and recognize that they are political machines. They are not naturally imbued with any particular ideology, and the ends to what these machines are used for is determined by who's operating the machine, who's in the driver's seat. It's been nice to watch over the last 10 years the neoconservatives and the Republican Party lose control of the wheel of the car. And the current coalition that's operating it is this MAGA coalition that includes the MAHA coalition and includes to some degree some libertarian voices. I personally think, you know, whatever state you plant yourself in, I think if your goal is political success, I think you should use the Republican Party as the vehicle to get there. Certainly I don't see anything good coming out of the Democratic Party. But anyway, so those two bits of advice. Consider moving to New Hampshire and use the political vehicle that's the most effective to you. Yeah?
Do you think we could ever get a law passed that would ban dual citizens from holding political office?
I know Thomas Massey has floated that. The hard thing with passing laws on the federal level is it's got to go through Congress. And there's a lot of dual citizens in Congress, which is the problem, right? So yeah, it's kind of like asking, do you think Congress will ever vote for term limits?
No.
Why the hell would they? Right? You know, when we got term limits in Maine, it was because we had a referendum process that could go on the ballot and be voted on by the people. But you know, so no, I don't know what a path is there. Maybe short of like a constitutional amendment. Again, that goes through if you did like an Article 5 convention and pass a constitutional amendment about it. I certainly think that at very least dual citizenship should be like disclosed, whatever country it is. So, yeah.
One more thing. Anthony Pecoraro won 6 inside. What's your take on that?
I was at the YalCon Atlanta talking, and this was like a chant, like 6 inside. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the whole thing is. Is this like in the Yal office? Is it Yal events? Like,
Yale doesn't let Yale employees smoke cigs in the office.
you shouldn't smoke in the office. You should go outside. Now, I'll say I'm not a smoker, so I'm a little biased, and I think you can smoke whatever death sticks you want to smoke. I will say, there aren't enough of us to go around of principled liberty activists with their heads screwed on straight. And I certainly would encourage you to healthy living because I want to keep you around. So, look, we all have our vices. Cigarettes are not as bad as some vices. But anyway, you don't want the Yale office smelling like smoke and cigarettes. That'll be annoying. So no, I'm against cigs inside. All right. Was there?
Me again.
Yeah.
My favorite Bible verse is Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. How would you say faith interacts with the political sphere and gives us a sense of meaning?
Mm.
Or for you, how does it do it for you?
Yeah. Well, I would say we should understand that the libertarian philosophy is a negative philosophy. The libertarian philosophy does not tell you how to find meaning in life. It does not tell you how to live. Specifically, it tells you how not to live. It tells you don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. That's not enough for fulfilling life. It's like basic rules of the road for how we have a peaceful society. So, I'm not going to tell anyone kind of what, I don't think my place is here to tell people what their kind of individual faith journey or belief should be, but I hope that you believe in something. And I hope, I know in my life I've been very inspired by the life of Jesus Christ and the teachings that I grew up with in the church. I'm also very inspired by, other sources. Taoism, I think, is very. I think Taoism is a lot like kind of the natural law philosophy, but kind of spoken in Eastern terms. Anyway, don't make libertarianism itself the be-all, end-all of your life. You need to look for the full measure of your life philosophy in other places as well. So, I appreciate the question. Javier.
Not a question, but a comment. Addressing what Jonathan, I think is your name, right? Jason, earlier. One thing that I think we don't speak enough of is to let people, politically speaking, to read what they saw. Meaning, the state of Massachusetts wants to go to hell, let it go to hell. Read what they saw, and you move to New Hampshire, and you'll be in heaven. The state of California wants to go to hell. They should be free to condemn themselves to political and economic hell. And a lot of places don't, just like on a personal level, that sometimes we have family or friends that they have a kind of life that affects everybody in the family in such a negative way, and you invest so many resources trying to save them, but they don't want to save themselves, and at some point you have to distance yourself from that toxicity and let them read what they saw. And one advantage that we have in New Hampshire, and particularly the Free State Project, is that you have a safe haven, that as these people hopefully go to hell, you can get out of that march and work for freedom.
Right. I think about what is it Ronald Reagan said. He told the story about someone who's fleeing from Cuba, coming to America, and I'm going to butcher kind of the story, but he said, how terrible it is that this is what happened to your country and all that. And he said, no, I am so fortunate that I had somewhere to escape to, right? Back when America did a better job of standing for freedom and liberty. Keep fighting where you are for as long as you can for freedom. And if you get to a point where you need a place to escape to, we're building it in New Hampshire.
Live free or die.
Live free or die. But I will say, Javier, in response to kind of one thing that you said there, though, I think the hard thing is that this is the problem of democracy, right? Is that we say let the people get what they vote for. Well, not everyone voted for it. You have a lot of freedom-loving patriots here in Massachusetts who are being dragged along by Democratic majorities down a road to hell. Right? They didn't consent to this. You know. But this is the system as it is. We operate, we live under democratic systems, as imperfect as they are, and so we have to use the machinery of those systems as best we can to advance liberty. And some states, I'm not going to tell you which states, you'll have to decide for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Some states might be so far gone that it's going to be, at least in this generation, turning it around is not likely. But through the concentration strategy in New Hampshire, we are building a life raft for people who love liberty. No income tax, no sales tax, constitutional carry, school choice, we're the first state to pass Defend the Guard through the lower chamber, and on and on and on. Tyrannical systems in New Hampshire are dying a death by 1,000 cuts. Whereas in other states like Maine, where I came from, liberty is dying to death by 1,000 cuts. I felt like in Maine, I could advance liberty in one particular area where I was focused on. I could advance gun rights with constitutional carry. I could advance right to try. Whatever I was focused on, I could do. But I also felt like areas where I can only do so much. I'm only one person, and I would see all the other areas, all the other spheres of liberty sliding backwards. And it felt like I might take one big, bold step forward here for liberty, but everything else is taking 3-5 steps backwards. That's not sustainable. In New Hampshire, we have so many liberty activists who are working every single issue, down to ones that seem so minor, but people are really passionate about. And liberty is advancing in all of these spheres, little by little by little. It's the exact opposite of what I experienced in Maine. And I bet it's the exact opposite of what some of you are experiencing in your states. Even if you manage to score single victories, as significant as they are, if the overall sphere of liberty is sliding backwards, it doesn't spell a road to a good place. Are we out of time?
We were going to have a social time for the new person after Chris Ryan speaks. So it's honestly up to you. It's 3 o'clock. We have you until 3:15 if you want to keep talking.
I can keep taking questions if there's still questions from
What
folks.
is sort of a final call to action you give to everyone here?
Come to Porkfest. Seriously though, and my call to action is going to be come to Porkfest. But seriously, in whatever way that you are pursuing the cause of freedom and liberty, whether it's through political activism in your own state, running for office, supporting people who do run for office, working in your state legislature, or I know people who are doing amazing things for liberty that are completely non-political. I know people who pioneered Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and built a whole parallel monetary system to challenge the Federal Reserve. I know people who are building homeschooling networks that are creating a parallel structure so people can get their kids out of the government schools. Whatever, I know people who are building, pursuing food freedom and challenging the corrupt government, tyrannical food systems by doing the radical thing of growing their own food and building food networks with other people. Whatever your path for fighting for freedom is in your sphere of influence, do it. But it's also important to come together and have community with other people who share your values. And I will say that's one of the things I'm very blessed now that I'm in New Hampshire is to see that like every single day there's a liberty event taking place pretty much. We have such strong community in New Hampshire in a way I have not seen for the liberty movement in any other state. Like you can go to our website, fsp.org, look at the community calendar, and you will see an event happening almost every single day, from meetups to rucking groups, to libertarian theater societies, to whatever you're interested in, board game nights with libertarian, like whatever it is, right? But chances are, where you are, like, you might not have that. I think most states don't have that like New Hampshire has. But the Porcupine Freedom Festival, June 16th through the 22nd, thousands of liberty lovers come together from around the country and the world every single summer, and we have a great week of discussing liberty ideas, being in community with other people who share our values, and it's like a libertarian. By the way, I don't know if people aren't familiar with it. It's an outdoor libertarian camping festival at these campgrounds up under the White Mountains. It's beautiful. You all are welcome. This year we have Joel Salatin, who's a leader in the food freedom movement, is coming to speak. We have Scott Horton, who's one of the great leaders in the anti-war movement on the libertarian side. Recently wrote the book Provoked, about how this whole unprovoked war in Ukraine wasn't actually so unprovoked, no matter what the corporate press tells us. We have Clifton Duncan, who is a Broadway actor who was canceled because he wouldn't get a COVID vaccine. He had his whole career stolen from him. Anyway, we have so many folks. So check out porkfest.com, and also I would say if you need a little bit of hope and optimism while living in a state where there isn't such clear forward progress on liberty, then, and this is what I really would ask every one of you to do, and I would ask you to do it right now, is pull out your phone and go to fsp.org and sign up for my weekly email newsletter, where we share stuff that's happening for the liberty movement, and at least get, if things aren't going so well in your state, you can look and see all the great advancements that are happening in New Hampshire, and at least get a little bit of hope that liberty's winning somewhere. and then come and visit and see it for yourself.
It's the best political porno there is.
The best political porno there is. Well, I haven't received a compliment like that before. I'm not sure what to make of that. Yeah, in the back.
Eric, good story. So we had this famous libertarian in Massachusetts. You probably know him. We'll just call him Brad.
Yeah, Brad Wyatt.
That's right. So in 2012, we used to elect our RNC delegates at the congressional district level, and Brad stole pretty much through behind the scenes 2012 technology that they had at the time, not like it is today. And he beat the establishment at their own game. He packed the Massachusetts delegation at the 2012 RNC with Mitt Romney, with all
I remember that.
libertarians. It was all pretty much libertarians. Doug, you know about that, right? In fact, Charlie Baker, who used to be our governor, he was on the ballot in his district, and some 19-year-old kid.
You know, it was amazing that year, 2012, the height of the Ron Paul revolution, and I remember being so politically naive, right? I didn't know that we weren't supposed to win, right? So we just went out and won anyway. But I remember, running, it's a similar thing in Maine, we put together our slate of delegates of Ron Paul supporters. We got our numbers there. And our delegates, boy, I remember my friend Erin. She was like me. She was 23 years old. She'd never been elected anything. She was up against the Republican Secretary of State for the state of Maine, and she won. Right? Nobody understood what just happened. And I think it's so wonderful. I think the case of Brad demonstrates that too, right?
Yeah, he's our RNC.
He's the RNC National Committee man now.
He's not even a Republican. He's a conservative. conservative. Libertarian. Everybody knows.
Right. Well, what is a Republican, right? It's just someone with an R next to their name.
Yeah. Lapdog.
Right? I mean, I'd like to think that a Republican is supposed to be someone who believes in the Republic. But you asked me to name a Republican president since perhaps Calvin Coolidge, excluding, we'll see how things work out with Donald Trump. We'll see, we can judge him through the lens of history down the road. But you asked me to name a Republican president in recent memory who believed in the Republic, and I can't name one. Maybe Reagan to some degree, but he also built up the empire in a lot of ways too. And anyway, so Republicans should believe in the Republic. Democrats should believe in democracy. But these political parties that have been named after political philosophies, ultimately they become just political machines that get oriented towards whatever end the people who seize control of them orient them towards. So I've been involved the last 15 years in trying to seize the machinery of the Republican Party away from the neoconservatives to put it in the hands of the Ron Paul Liberty Movement. And I'm very grateful with stories like Brad, with the fact that in Maine, the Ron Paul Liberty Movement is an established wing of the GOP now that isn't going anywhere. In New Hampshire, literally the House Republican majority leader is a guy who moved to New Hampshire for the Free State Project, who can tell you all about Murray Rothbard and Henry Hazlitt, and we have like half of the Republican caucus in the New Hampshire legislature are libertarians in red jerseys. That's exactly like demonstration that the Ron Paul revolution over the last decade has made tremendous advancements that we don't always hear about because it's not happening in Washington, D.C. It's happening in the states and the local party apparatuses. And that's the quiet revolution that will not be televised because they only televise the things that happen in the Washington, D.C. circus. But if we don't get distracted and we focus on the places where we can actually win and seize the machinery to advance liberty, then that's how we get there. So the story of Brad winning out after all these years is a really great example of that.
They changed it, so right after that, it's now party decision, so the hacks and the do-nothing.
Of course they did.
That's what we lost on.
Of course they did. They never learned their lesson. Just like when they said all delegates have to be bound, and then it turned against them, and meant they got stuck with Donald Trump. Anyway, they never learned. Any other questions, or you got the cane ready to yank me off stage? All right. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate you listening, and good questions.